Nobody has liver attacks, kidney attacks. They have heart attacks and brain attacks called strokes. No other organ has attacks, even though the blood is the same and the arteries are the same, which led me to think it's got to do with the organ, not the blood supply. You don't have to know what's true in order to know what's not true. That is a fundamental principle of logic, rational thinking. If somebody says, I had video at a 7-Eleven where somebody was shot and killed, and it was a man between 18 and 60 wearing jeans, so you're under arrest. You say, well, I wasn't there. I was in Singapore, not Boston. And the guy says, until you prove to me who killed the guy, you're under arrest. That's ridiculous. All you have to prove is you weren't there. We've proven that that's not the cause of heart attacks. I didn't know what was, but eventually that became clear that it has to be something to do with the heart and the brain, not the blood vessels. I know there's no atoms. I know blocked arteries don't cause heart attacks. I know viruses don't exist. I know all those things for sure. It doesn't mean that I know what causes somebody to be sick. I don't know who killed that guy. I know it wasn't me. That's called thinking.
Tom, right now in the world, the number one cause of death is cardiovascular disease. What is actually the cause of that?
Well, the number one cause of cardiovascular, number one type of cardiovascular disease is in the realm of angina, unstable angina, and heart attacks. So there's a lot of other kinds of heart disease like congestive heart failure and atrial fibrillation and SVT and a lot of other things. But most people, when they're referring to heart disease, they're referring to like heart attacks. Right?
Yeah, let's go there.
Just to
and strokes.
Yeah. So the other ones have slightly different causes. Now, if you ask pretty much any doctor, whether it's a cardiovascular surgeon or a cardiologist or an internist or a family doctor or an alternative practitioner or a functional medicine doctor, any of them, what causes people to have heart attacks, right? That's what we're talking about. And they would say some variation of, you have three major coronary arteries. Those are the big blood vessels that bring the blood to the heart. And one or more of them gets blocked with plaque, and then the blood can't get through. And then downstream from the blockage, there's not enough food and not enough oxygen, and you can't get rid of the waste products. And as that builds up and under a stressful situation like exercise, there's an imbalance between the oxygen delivery through the blood and the need of the heart. And then that causes pain, and then worse pain, and then necrosis or breakdown of the heart tissue. Then they would dispute what causes the blockage. So the regular cardiologists and the cardiovascular surgeons would say it's cholesterol, or then they would eventually change that and say it's not all cholesterol, it's LDL. And then they eventually sort of changed that and said it's not all LDL, it's Lp(a), which is a type of cholesterol or a type of lipoprotein, basically. And so all those are causing a block. They're building up in the artery and blocking and causing this stenosis and decreased blood flow. Now, the alternative holistic functional doctors would say, no, it's not cholesterol, it's not Lp(a), or maybe it is a little bit. It's not LDL, it's inflammation. And there's an inflammation in the blood vessels, and that's for a lot of reasons. It could be an infection, could be heavy metals, could be stress, could be bad diet, could be not enough exercise. And that inflammation is the cause of the blockage. The conventional doctors would say, you got this blockage, you have to unblock it, right? You got a pipe, and the pipe is blocked, so you roto-root it out, which is called a stent, or you bypass it, which is called a bypass, or you give statin drugs to lower the LP little a or the LDL or the cholesterol. The functional alternative holistic doctors would say, no, you need a better diet. You need to reduce the inflammation, reduce stress, get rid of heavy metals, do chelation to get rid of the plaque buildup, and then you don't need any of those surgeries or the drugs. Okay? Just to put that out there, that's the normal thing. And then 1 out of 1,000 or less is me, and I say the whole thing doesn't have anything to do with blocked arteries. Has nothing to do with that. And so neither of those two approaches have any merit because that's not the problem. Now, where did I get that from, right? Because out of 1,000 people, including the next 100 people walking down the street, you ask them, why do people get heart attacks? Because you get a blocked artery, right? If they know anything about it, they know that. So I don't know if you want me to keep going here.
Yeah, well, let's move into how you see it.
Right. So it's not really, it's a little bit how I see it, but how did I get to see it the way I saw it? So if you, the first thing that struck me was, so I worked as an ER doctor for a while, and I also worked in a cardiac cath lab where they put the dye in and they see the blockages and all that. So I had a certain experience with this because ER doctors see a lot of people with chest pain. And we were told that all the blood to the heart goes through these 3 main arteries, right? And they show you drawings of it, and I don't want to link to this, but I could show you a drawing, 3 main arteries. So I asked myself first the question of, if there's something that's building up in the arteries, right? Either inflammation or LDL or plaque or something, is the blood the same everywhere in the body?
Yes.
Right, yes. Because nobody thinks there's a special blood that goes to your heart and a different blood that goes to your spleen, etc. Right? So the answer was yes. Second question, are the blood vessels, the arteries, the same? The splenic artery is the same as the coronary artery?
Yes.
Yes. Nobody thinks different. There's not like some special artery that goes to your heart. So therefore, if the problem is something in the blood that's building up or inflamed, it would happen in the splenic artery and the heart artery.
You
right?
think so, yeah.
Because they're the same. Okay, so then I said, how many people have I ever seen with heart attacks? Lots. Dick Cheney, Bill Clinton, Uncle Fred, thousands of people in the ER, etc. How many people have I seen with spleen attacks?
0.
40 years in medicine, the answer is 0. And I probably asked 100,000 people in my career, like every time I do a talk on the heart, I'll say, how many people have seen anybody with a spleen attack? One guy raised his hand, but it turns out he meant the guy had a ruptured spleen from an injury. So that's not what I mean. So nobody. So why is that? Nobody has liver attacks, kidney attacks, eye attacks, foot attacks. They have heart attacks and brain attacks called strokes. No other organ has attacks, even though the blood is the same and the arteries are the same, which led me to think it's got to do with the organ, not the blood flow, blood supply. So that was the first thing. The next thing is, I don't know how many people I saw who the story was they walked up Mount Tam or Mount Monadnock or somewhere with their wife. They felt a little funny. They had a little chest pain. The wife said, you have to go to the cardiologist. They go to the cardiologist. He does a test. He says, you're 94% blocked or so. If you block any more, they always wag their finger at them, you're going to have a heart attack. And I thought to myself, if all the blood to your heart goes through these 3 arteries and you're 94% blocked, that means you have 6% blood flow to your heart. How did you walk up Mount Dale? And you mean if you block from 6% to 4% or 3%, that's going to kill you? 6% is 0% effectively. You don't have any blood flow to your heart. So it doesn't matter if you block anymore because you're already at 0 or close. So that was weird, right? So then I did the thing which you would think all doctors would do, but as far as I know, I'm the only one who's done it, which is I said, okay, there must be studies that look at people who, say, die of heart attacks, and they do an autopsy on them, and they see how many of them have a blockage in the air, in the blood vessel leading to the part of their heart that had a heart attack, right? I mean, if somebody says your sink is leaking, you go to call a plumber, he looks at the pipe leading to your sink and says, no, it's not blocked, it's good, it's not the pipe. So I looked, and it turns out what I found was when they started this heart attack theory called the thrombosis theories, that the cardiologists didn't believe it. They said, no, it's got nothing to do with the blockages. There's a robust blood flow through secondary collateral vessels. Got nothing to do with blockages. So I looked, and it turns out that there were a bunch of studies from the 40s and 50s, 60s, looking at the percentage of people who died of a heart attack. So these are the worst of the worst, right? They had a heart attack, they died. Not everybody dies. The highest number I found was 78%, and the lowest number was 18% had a blockage, which means that somewhere between 22% and 82% had no blockage in the area in the blood vessel leading to the part of the heart that had the attack. So why did they die? Like, what happened to them? Now, even if you have 78%, that doesn't mean that was there before the heart attack. Because then I read a book called The Etiopathogenesis of Coronary Artery Disease, or Coronary Heart Disease, by a pathologist named Giorgio Baroldi. You can go and look it up, the book. And he studied people who died of heart attack for 40 years with autopsies. And he said 41% of them have a blocked artery leading to the part of the heart that died. And of those 41%, half of the blockages clearly came after the heart attack, not before. In other words, there was damage to the heart, and like a dam. So there's a damage to the river, and you get backflow and buildup of debris in the river coming into the dam, right? So we're talking 18% of the people had any blockage before the heart attack of the people who died and had an autopsy. So that made me, being the reasonable person that I may be, said, that's not the cause of heart attacks. Now, at the time, I didn't know what was, which is fine. You don't have to know what's true in order to know what's not true. That is a fundamental principle of logic, rational thinking, and supposedly science, even though most doctors have never heard of it. But, you don't know if somebody says, oh, I had video at a 7-Eleven where somebody was shot and killed, and it was a man between 18 and 60 wearing jeans, so you're under arrest. You say, well, I wasn't there. I was in Singapore, not Boston, and I have proof, and you prove that you weren't there, et cetera. And the guy says, until you prove to me tell me who killed the guy, you're under arrest. Like, that's ridiculous, right? Nobody would say that. All you have to prove is you weren't there. And so we've proven that that's not the cause of heart attacks. Now, again, I didn't know what was, but eventually that became clear that it has to be something to do with the heart and the brain, not the blood vessels. So it turns out that what happens is there's an imbalance in the energy generation in the heart. And the heart goes what's called glycolytic, which means it builds up acid. Just like if your muscle exceeds its capacity, like your leg, you build up lactic acid and you get a cramp, right? Everybody knows that. And why doesn't your leg have an attack? Because your leg stops and you flush the lactic acid out and then you go on your way. Same thing happens in your heart. Your heart isn't efficiently burning fuel, and so it uses accessory pathways to ferment, which means lactic acid, which causes cramps, which we call angina. The difference with your heart and your brain as compared to the spleen and your liver and your foot is your heart and the brain can't stop. So they keep going, they build up more acid. That causes a breakdown of the tissue, which is what we call a heart attack. And then the debris builds up upriver, which is why you get plaque buildup upstream. And all of the changes you see, every heart attack is accompanied by a drop in the pH, acidity, and it's come because there's damage to the organ. Now, that can come from a lot of reasons: bad food, emotions, EMFs, heavy metals, stress, decreased parasympathetic tone. Lots of reasons cause that. And decreased small vessel blood flow, which was one of the things that diabetics get more heart attacks, but they don't get more plaque, which is a, quote, anomaly. Which means it doesn't make sense. But it does make sense if you realize that all the blood flow, or 90-some%, is small vessels, not big vessels, and diabetics get small vessel disease, and so that's why they get heart attacks. Plaque, it turns out, is an adaptive response, as is everything in the body. That's the magic of thinking differently. So a blood vessel is basically a protein tube that has fluid in it that's water-based, which we call blood. Now, it turns out that every time there's a hydrophilic tube, like a protein, and water, that there's an interface between them which forms a protective gel. You can prove that, absolutely. Like you put a beaker of water and you suspend a horizontal hydrophilic tube, and the water will start moving in the tube because there's a gel that's formed on the inside of the tube that's negatively charged. And that pushes the positive charge into the water. They repel and start moving. And it all has to do with the formation of this gel layer inside the tube. So that happens in your arteries. And that gel layer protects your artery and your blood vessels. Now, the gel layer it's increased with things like sun exposure and earthing, connection to the earth. And when somebody puts their hands on you, or when you're sitting next to your dog, at least most dogs, or thinking good thoughts. And if you put your cell phone next to this beaker, the gel layer stops forming and the velocity of the blood stops moving. So now the question I asked myself, if you're a body and you're smart and you have a person who hasn't protected their arteries with this gel because they never move, they're never out in the sun, they never connected to the earth, they have bad relationships, they eat bad food, and their dog died. So the body patches the weak vessels with plaque. That is a brilliant strategy. because then it won't burst. Now, the doctors come along and say, oh, you see, you have plaque buildup. We're going to scrape off the plaque. It's like, oh, you have a cracked pipe, and so you put some cement on it so it won't break. I know the problem with why you don't have good water flow, because the cement is restricting the flow. So we're going to get rid of the cement. What happens next? It bursts. So that's what happens or could happen. So the body doesn't want that, so it makes plaque. Now, that does have a problem, just like your pipe. You will get less blood flow through there. But what are you going to do? The guy doesn't go out in the sun. He doesn't eat good food. He's got toxic relations. You got no choice. So you do the best thing you can, which is to make plaque.
Well, the other thing the body does, and you touched on this quickly, is make collaterals. So it'll sprout new vessels to make up for that.
Do its own bypass. And you can show that, if you, the thing is, the coronary angiogram where they stick the dye in was a very cleverly organized test that specifically doesn't show the collateral vessels because it's got heavy dye and they put it under pressure. So it only goes through the big blood vessels, the major coronary arteries, which is very convenient because then they can say, you see, that's where all the blood goes and yours is blocked. And it actually has no relevance to the blood flow to your heart. But then they can draw their pictures and say, see, this is 70, 80, 90% blocked, even though how can you possibly see the percentage of blockage on a two-dimensional picture of a three-dimensional tube with stuff in it? And so you show it to one radiologist, and he says, oh, it's 40% blocked because he doesn't like doing stents. You show it to another one who has, he's invested in stents, and he says it's 80% blocked because they can't tell. And they do it based on personal preference.
All right, I want to start to piece together. You've shared a lot, and I'm making some connections, but I want to make sure we all are. So when somebody has cardiovascular disease, it starts in the heart, the metabolism changes, we have the lactic acid buildup, death of that tissue, and this can happen in the brain as well. And then what you're saying is over time, to compensate, the body's going to block off vessels, but that happens afterwards. Do I have that part right?
It can happen before too. It happens anytime you have blood vessel and not a robust protective layer, which happens to everybody who doesn't take care of their water, essentially. Then you will have non-protective gel layers and your body will make plaque, which is why most people have some plaque.
Okay. Originally, I had thought it was a secondary step to the heart being damaged, but you're saying those can happen independently.
Yes. But that's not what causes the heart attack. What caused the heart attack is an energetic metabolic deficiency of the heart. And you can even, the heart creates a energy toroidal field around it. And you can map it and you can measure it. And interestingly, it goes about 6 feet out, which the powers that shouldn't be know that, which is why they wanted to keep people 6 feet apart so they didn't have a connection heart to heart with other people. So they're separated and lonely and scared and all the rest of it. So that was part of it. But you can see that energetic field shrink. You can actually feel it. And that's the precursor to having a heart attack.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand the nuance here. You explained the structured water piece and that coating inside the vessels. And when we lose that, the body smartly puts a cement layer and coats that to protect it. I just want to understand insult wise, what's causing that versus damage to the heart itself? Or is it the same
That
thing?
doesn't cause damage to the heart.
No, but the thing that's causing that disruption in the gel in the vessel, is that the same thing that's causing the metabolic changes in the heart?
To a certain extent, yes. Bad food, bad water, no connection to the sun or the earth or loving relations, stress, toxins, vaccines, heavy metals, all that usual stuff. Pharmaceutical drugs, all that. Those are all energetic insults, which inhibit you from forming a gel layer and inhibit the normal ability of the heart to create a robust electromagnetic field. Then it can't metabolize properly, starts building up lactic acid, and then the whole thing happens. And by the way, turns out there's a plant that gets rid of the lactic acid and restores the blood flow and helps the parasympathetic nervous system, which in a way helps prove that it doesn't do anything to the plaque. And that's called strophanthus. And it's an extract of seeds from a vine, grows in Africa. And strophanthus seed extract has been used to treat this constellation of angina, unstable angina, congestive heart failure, heart attacks for 100 years. Incredibly successfully, because the linchpin in this is the buildup of acidity, and strophanthus extracts get rid of the acidic buildup. So that's why the natives called it the gift from paradise.
And what can that reverse, or can it at all? If the tissue's dead, I assume that heart tissue can't be fixed. But is this for tissue that's just starting to be affected by this?
Somebody has chest pain, shortness of breath, loss of energy. There, you can feel some people can actually feel their field, electromagnetic field, shrinking into their being. And I mean, you can feel that with people. They're like shrunken into themselves. And then you can give them strophanthus and you can expand the field, makes them more metabolically efficient, gets rid of the acid, and it breaks that cycle that leads to heart attacks.
And for somebody who has had damage done to this coating in the vessels, and they're at the point where they have plaque buildup, how reversible is that? And what
you don't need to worry about that.
Okay. And I was going to say, what would the person do? But you've named a number of insults. Obviously, you want to reverse those.
You don't need to do anything. Your body will take care of that by making collateral circulation.
Okay. Will the body eventually absorb that and repair it, or it'll just work around it?
No, it'll just work around it.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen some people who it gets less, but it doesn't seem to make any difference.
Okay, the other piece I want to make sure we delve into is this theory that you've disproven that the heart is a pump. So this ties into what we've been talking about here. You've mentioned energy field. There's a lot more going on with this organ than conventional medicine would lead us to believe. But let's start with the pump piece, and then we can move from there.
Right. So with everything in life, it's good to define your terms. Otherwise, you don't know what you're talking about. So when I say the heart is not a pump, what do I mean by a pump? I mean a pressure propulsion device. What does that mean? It means that the reason the blood moves around the body is it's propelled by the heart. And the way it's propelled is the ventricle, especially the left ventricle, contracts. It's a muscle. It contracts. That increases the pressure and propels the liquid, i.e. the blood, around the body. That's what we're told. Again, so that's the claim. Now, I looked at this claim, 40 some years ago and said, okay, how long are the tubes in the body? 10,000 miles or so. So you got a 1-pound organ with walls like this thick, and you got sticky fluid in there in those tubes that are 10,000 miles long, if you put them end to end, with stuff in the tubes that's approximately the internal diameter of the tube. In other words, the red blood cells are about the same size as the diameter of the tube. What are the chances you can get a 1-pound organ to push sticky fluid 10,000 miles?
Not good.
Not good. And not only that, but this fluid, if you go do a velocity chart at different points, it's going fastest, the blood, as it enters the heart, and it's going the same speed as it exits the heart, and then it slows down, and then it gets to the capillaries, the little vessels, and then it does like a little shimmy and stops, and then it gets going again. Now, if you're a farmer and you have a tank, and then you go down to a pond, and then the water in the pond is stopped, and then you want to get the water from the pond up back to the tank, where do you put the pump?
Down at the bottom.
Not at the tank, right?
Yeah, you got to get it down at the bottom and pump back up to the tank.
Pump it back up. But that's exactly the opposite. Here they're saying the pump is at the top. And by the way, the pump doesn't make the water go any faster. And I thought, oh, that's friggin' weird, because you would think it would go slow in and faster out, and then it would go down, and it would stop. And how are you going to get it back up? Because I can tell you, if I want to go from San Francisco to New York on a bus, and the bus is going to stop in St. Louis, and there's no engine in the bus, I'm not getting in the bus. Because I don't know how, if it stops in St. Louis, it's going to get back going again to get to New York. So that was the second reason I thought, this is wonky. The third reason is, if you look at the outflow of the left ventricle, and I saw this when I was working in a cath lab, it's an arch, like McDonald's arch, right? Now imagine you have a garden hose, and you put a flexible hose, a spigot at your house, right? Put a flexible garden hose off the spigot, and it's shaped like an arch. And you turn it off, shaped like an arch, and you turn it on full blast, because you got to pump a long way. So that's going to really push the blood. And the garden hose like this, and it can bend. What's going to happen to the garden hose?
It's going to straighten out.
It's going to straighten out, right? Has to. So you know what happens to the aortic arch as you go into systole, which is the pumping part? It bends in. And I remember I saw this, and I asked the cardiologist, I said, look, it bends in. It can't possibly bend in if it's pushing through there, right? Can't possibly do that.
That's the opposite, yeah.
Yeah. So I said, how come it does that? He said, that's the way it does. And I said, I know that's the way it does because I can see it. He said, that's just the way it does. So that told me there's no way that's pushing through there. No way. So that led me again. So my rule is, don't worry about what is true. Just think about what isn't true. I didn't kill that guy. I don't know who did. Don't ask me who killed him. That's not my job. I just know that I didn't do it. So I know at that point, there's no way this is a pressure propulsion device. And I know that the pump has to be in your leg. Has to be. Just like if you got a pond, it has to be at the pond. But I didn't know what the pump was. Then I saw an experiment Gerald Pollack did. Same one. You get a beaker of water with a horizontal tube, And just the nature of tubes interacting with water, capillaries interacting with blood, forms a gel layer, which is negatively charged, that pushes the positive charges into the liquid water, the blood, and they repel and start moving. So that happens in your leg, in your spleen, in your eyes, everywhere. And then as it coalesces from capillaries to venules to veins, just like a river, if it goes from a wetland to a single river, it goes faster and faster, right?
Yeah.
Just compression. It's called Bernoulli's principle. So that gets it go faster and faster. It gets to the heart. The heart functions like a hydraulic ram. So there's it goes into a tank. The walls of the tank expand, right? Into a tank, the walls expand. You with me?
Yeah.
That creates positive pressure in the tank and negative pressure on the other side of the gate. So then when the positive pressure differential is enough, the gate opens, the arch sucks in because of the negative pressure, and the blood falls down to the capillaries. Then it gets re-energized and comes back up. So the function of the heart is to stop the blood and creates this spiral. And, the Sufis say when the blood is stopped in the heart and there's a spiral formed, that's when God enters into the human being. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's when the creative force of life, it always works through spirals, and the heart goes spiral down, spiral up, spiral down, spiral up. And when it spirals up, it's like plunging your toilet. That helps to suck the blood up to the heart. And you can prove that. And so that's what the heart is doing. It's acting like a suction device to stop the blood, create this vortex so that, God or the electromagnetic field or the energy of the universe or creation enters into you, creating this toroidal field that allows you to live as a full human being. And if you miss the picture and think the heart is a pump, you're a doofus. That's a scientific term for you've missed the point.
And this connects to what we were talking about before when we were talking about plaque, where this layer in the vessels is what we were talking about got disrupted before when plaque formed. So just to form the full circle here.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And they both come from the same causes, which is pure food, pure water, sunlight, earth, being part of an electromagnetic field that's nourishing, including relations and thoughts and traumas and, sucking on metals and vaccines, poison in you and pharmaceuticals and all the rest of it.
Let's bring high blood pressure into this. A common ailment for many. Talk about the mechanism and what changes when the body ramps that up.
So you got a garden, right? And you got a pump and a hose, right? Your hose, I don't know if you can see me, right?
I can.
Yeah, your hose is this big. And your pump is getting old and leaking, etc., right? And you don't have enough money to fix your pump, but you can change the hose so you can keep gardening on the other side of the garden. What do you do to the hose?
Put your thumb over the end?
Yeah. But you can do more than that. Get a new hose.
Well, yeah. I'm just
what?
trying to think of if your hose is defective and your pressure is low.
How do you increase that? Is fine, but it's this big, and you're not getting enough pressure.
Yeah.
So what do you do to your hose?
Get rid of it. Get a thinner hose.
Get a smaller diameter hose.
Yeah.
Not a thinner hose.
Well, that's what I meant by thinner.
Yeah, that's what you meant by thinner, but not thinner wall hose.
No.
Smaller diameter.
Thinner, yeah, smaller diameter.
Right?
Yep.
Because that'll keep the pressure up until you fix your pump.
Or go to the end and put your thumb over and then...
Or go to the end and put your thumb over it. So you got this bad pump in your body, in your tissues, because you're never out in the sun, you're never connected to the earth, you have bad relations, bad thoughts, you get vaccines, take pharmaceutical, you got a bad pump. No gel layer. So your body says, oh, we don't have enough flow here, and our brain is, we're dizzy and erectile dysfunction because there's no pressure, and we're tired all the time. I want to keep the flow going. Okay, guy, fix your pump, but you don't listen. You're right. You don't do anything different. So the body says, okay, I'm going to stiffen and narrow the tubes so that we get more flow. That raises the pressure, and that's called high blood pressure, which is a wonderful adaptive response to somebody who won't fix their pump. Now, the doctors, in their brilliance, come along and say, you see, you have high blood pressure. We're going to give you a bigger hose. So then you have a bigger hose, and now you're back to being dizzy, and you can't get an erection, and you're tired. But that's just because those are the side effects of the drug. Right. But that's because you've stopped the body from doing what it needs to do, and the only thing it could do, because you're too dumb to fix your pump. So it narrows the tubes. Now, you could come along and say, yeah, but Tom, if you keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing, eventually you won't have any blood flow and then you'll die. And that's true. So if you don't want your body to have to narrow the tube, you might want to fix your pump. And then the body stops narrowing the tubes, and which is why I never had to give anybody high blood pressure meds. I just fixed their pump. And then the body just, got a bigger pipe, hose, because it doesn't want to do that. But if that's the only choice it has, and the point is, this is not a disease. This is your body's strategy to deal with a person who's not living properly. It's brilliant.
And that's the way you look at all signs and symptoms. The body's trying to tell you something, and conventionally we mask those instead of listening.
Yeah, you get a splinter in your finger and you don't take it out. What happens next?
It gets inflamed, red, warm, pussy.
Pus. Right. Is the pus, is that a disease, i.e. you have an infection, or is that the body's way of getting the splinter out?
That's the body's treatment.
Right. It's obvious. Except we were taught it's an infection, give the person an antibiotics, keep the splinter in. I mean, then you take the splinter out. But let's say you can't. So it's got an infection. Or somebody breathes in crap in their lungs, like chemtrails and pollution and glyphosate, et cetera. And then what happens? You make pus and cough, et cetera. Why? To get the crap out of your lungs. Go to the doctor. He says you have bronchitis. It's caused by an imaginary virus. So we're going to stop it and keep the debris in your lungs. Great. What happens then? Well, you do that twice a year for 20 years, and then you get lung cancer. What is that? That's a bag of toxic debris in your lungs. How did that happen? Well, it built up. Why did it build up? Well, because I stopped it from coming out twice a year for 20 years. What do you think is going to happen? If somebody stops you from taking the garbage out of your house, my prediction, because I'm so smart, is you will build up garbage in your house.
Till you grab it up, put it in a bag, and bring it out.
Yeah, and to wrap it up, it's called a tumor. It's not a disease. It's somebody puts garbage in your house. You put it in a bag, and then you take it out to the curb. And if you keep putting more garbage than you can put in, you run out of bags, then it's called metastasizing.
In your opinion, whether it be a tumor, a really high prolonged fever, we can use any sign or symptom. And obviously, you just shared your general thoughts on this. It's the body doing the right thing for you at that time to assist in moving through this in the best way possible. But is there ever interventions you can think about where we can assist the body, even though it is doing what it knows best?
Yeah, you can fix your pump. You can take the splinter out. You can not breathe in so much toxic debris. You can, fast or take stuff and do enemas to clean out the debris so that it's easier to not build up toxic material. That's called medicine.
For somebody coming to this conversation right now who's lived a very conventional life to this point, accumulated a lot of toxins, hasn't been cognizant of these variables you brought into the conversation to this point, you mentioned enema, but what are some of the things to catalyze the detox process to get back to a baseline and try and purge the body of all this accumulation? What would you recommend?
Yeah, but it's entirely based on the history and the story of the person. Our whole new biology clinic, the whole way I did medicine, there's no diseases. That's a myth. And you can easily prove that. Like you go, okay, rheumatoid arthritis, right? That's a disease, right? A lot of people have. So what's the definition? Definition is somebody with swollen joints, sometimes bilaterally symmetrical. They're red, hot, swollen. And they have positive rheumatoid factor. That's an antibody which supposedly causes rheumatoid arthritis. So then the next person comes in, exact same symptoms. They test rheumatoid factor negative. What do they have? Rheumatoid factor negative rheumatoid arthritis. And I thought, you got to be kidding. That's like, I have this, it's like a little farm, and I have animals, and some of them are chickens, and they have wings and go like this, and the others are 4 legs, and they go meow. Those are non-feathered chickens, right? That's the kind of level of talking we're talking about. They're not non-feathered chickens. Those are cats. Those people don't have rheumatoid arthritis. And by the way, there's never been a study published, and I'm 100% sure of this, that shows that rheumatoid factor, the antibody that we're told causes rheumatoid arthritis, actually causes anything. Nobody has ever injected rheumatoid factor into healthy animals or people and showed that it causes any problems at all. Never. And if somebody disagrees, they're going to have to show me that study, which means there is no such thing as an autoimmune disease. They made that up. So it depends on how you got there. So one of these people, maybe they had a deficient diet for their life. They never ate any like bone broth or anything with collagen in it. And so their joints are weak, and that's why they're having trouble. Another person, it's, an emotional traumatic experience, and that's why their knee hurts. It's all started then. And then there was the guy who, couldn't walk for 5 years. His legs were weak. So what happened? He was fine, playing on the soccer team, helping his dad's machine shop. Then he goes in and gets a flu shot. Week later, his legs are paralyzed, and he 5 years later still can't walk. What happened to him? He got poisoned by a flu shot. So those need all different treatments. The idea that you could treat them the same based on a diagnosis is ludicrous. So I can't say generic 60-year-old, here's what to do. But I can tell you there's basically, from what I've seen, 4 ways people get sick. So you can think of it like this and think of which ones. So number 1 is injury. Like you fall off a horse, break your leg. So that happens. Number 2 is you're starving. Food, water, love, shelter, security, lots of things, right? People are starving and that causes troubles. A lot of that's food. Number 3, and maybe one of the biggest, well, there's only 4, but you're being poisoned. The main offenders are vaccines and pharmaceutical drugs. But there's a lot of other glyphosate, EMFs, there's a list as long as your arm. And the 4th and biggest, in my opinion, is you're delusional. And that means you think things that are nonsense. And when you think things that are nonsense, you do stuff that's ridiculous, and actions have consequences. Let me give you an example. I had a guy I knew is an anthroposophical doctor, supposedly holistic, but he believed in viruses, which are imaginary. We can get into that or not, but so because he believed in viruses, he spent his career treating AIDS people with HIV drugs because he believed there was such a thing as HIV and it caused AIDS, which is not true. So he was delusional. And then came COVID. And so because there was a virus that might kill him, he took 3 COVID shots. And after the 3rd one, 2 days later, dead in his bed from a blood clot stroke sort of thing. So why did he die? You could say he died from the shot, right, caused blood clots. Or you could say he died because he believed in viruses. That's why he died. And then the shot was a normal consequence of that belief system, right? That's what you do. And then the shot had a consequence. So if you believe your heart is a pump and blocked arteries cause heart attacks and high blood pressure is genetic and you have bronchitis because you were invaded by a bacteria or a virus, therefore you should stop it, you will do stuff that is inimical to your health and you will suffer the consequences.
When it comes to how these symptoms express themselves, how much of it in general has to do with the insult versus the person's constitution? Because we do have so many different symptoms, signs and symptoms that we call different diseases. How do we get different things with similar insults is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, people are different. Things have different meaning to people. The interesting thing about it is Western medicine and so-called science doesn't have any science of the body geography. In other words, if you say, well, why do you get shoulder pain instead of knee pain? No reason, right? It's just dumb luck. But in Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or even biofield tuning medicine, the shoulder has a different energetic quality than the knee. There's different meridians that go through that. So this one is a sign of like spleen imbalance or liver congestion, and the other is a sign of, heart meridian, whatever, right? I'm just making that up. So these are meaningful to the life of the body. This is a different way of expressing itself. And then we have different emotional trauma insults that, the knees have certain, support us kind of images, and shoulders are what you're carrying. And, all these things go into how we manifest the insult. And that's the interesting part of medicine. And the fun part is what happened to this person. And in order to do that, you need to know who they are, what their story is, and what has happened to them. And that's not something you learn in medicine.
Let's come back to the structured water piece. We know a healthy person in their vessels is going to have this layer of gel-like water protecting them. Let's bring in water and hydration as most people think of it, and any interaction there. So the water we're drinking versus this water in the body.
Right. So again, I always look at these things. So what's the claim? The claim that we learn in third grade, fourth grade or so is that matter exists in three phases: solid, liquid, gas. So there's solid copper, there's molten copper, there's gaseous copper, right? There's ice, water, liquid water, and steam. Okay? And then we're told we're 80 some percent water in our tissues. So because there's only three choices, I ask people, which phase of water is the water in our cells in? Well, it's not ice, right? And it's not steam. So it's got to be liquid water. So do you think you're a bag of liquid water sloshing around?
No, because I know your work.
Yeah, but so it doesn't feel like that, right? So then I'm an ER doctor and I see people get shot and bayoneted, et cetera. You know how many people I saw squirt water out of their body?
0.
Right. You ever seen that?
No. Blood,
No.
but not water.
Blood, but not water. But 80% of the tissues, the so-called cells, supposedly are just contain liquid water. But there's no blood, there's no water squirting out of anybody. I've never seen a puddle of water beneath somebody's stretcher in an ER. So I start thinking, is there something wrong here? And that's how I came to everything. This doesn't make any sense to me. Or my favorite expression is, this is weird, right? Because if there's supposed to be 80% water and I can cut you up and I never see any water in you, anybody. And so then you say, well, Jell-O, 90% water, 97% water. What phase is it in?
Number 4.
It's not ice. It's not water, because you can poke it and nothing comes out. It's definitely not steam. So it turns out there's a fourth phase of water. It's called a gel phase, structured water, crystalline water. Gerald Pollack calls it easy water, lots of different names. And it's charged, and all of the water in us is structured water. If it isn't, it's a puddle, and then you have edema. So what does it mean to have arthritis in your knee? You have fluid buildup. That's liquid water. So what happened? Your normal gel, which creates energy and a charge and lubricates, right? Gels keep, the movement is easy as opposed to just water. And something happened, you lost that ability to keep it in a gel, so it becomes a puddle. And that's not right. And everybody can see it, and they say, you see, I got water on my knee, right? You do. You have liquid water in your joint, and that's not right, because that's not supposed to be there. And then you go back to, how does the water structure in you? It's because you have water, pure water, electrolytes like sodium and potassium and calcium, et cetera. And then you have sunlight and earth and all the things I said. And that creates structured water. Now, it isn't like if you drink structured water, that water goes into your knee and creates structured water. But if you drink charged water, which is another word for structured water, it makes it easier than taking dead water with no charge and resurrecting that and creating a charge. And that's why all the healing waters, Lourdes, and all these fancy places, highly charged water. It makes it easier for you to keep the charge and the structure of your water, which is everything. That's how the blood flows. That's how your joints work. That's what makes the lining of your lungs. And if you get a fever, you liquefy it so that you can get rid of it easier. It's an amazing system when we miss the whole thing because we don't do science.
Okay, let me see if I get this at this point. In the body, we have structured water. There is water we're consuming that could be just, say, reverse osmosis, where we've taken the contaminants out. But even better than that is to charge the water. And it sounds like that's an in-between where it'll facilitate the body to make this structured water easier than, say, a distilled or RO water.
Right. I wouldn't drink RO or distilled water.
And then electrolytes you mentioned too as being a piece.
There's no charge in it. So you're having to use your energy, and I would say your precious energy, not to do fun things and garden and run and have creative thoughts, but to just keep the water in a somewhat crystalline state. That's your only thing you can do. So you're tired all the time. And then you don't have enough energy to run your heart, and then it builds up lactic acid, and then you have a heart attack.
Well, let's do a water hierarchy and talk about, from nature and interventions, the best we can start with for our drinking water, and then all the way down from there.
I mean, the best water is a pure spring that the water emerges from the earth on its own power. And as it comes up, this is in a way so-called primary water. It turns out new water is being made all the time, contrary to what we're told. Water is a renewable resource, as is basically oil and gas. We're not told that. We say it's a finite fuel made from fossils. It's not made from fossils, and it's renewable. That's a whole nother subject. Same with water, and when it comes up on its own, it's ripe and for drinking and using, and it comes up in a spiral formation, and then sometimes it flows in streams, in spirals, and it dissolves the rocks, so it has all these minerals in it, and it's highly charged. And that's the water you find at places like Lourdes. It always comes up on its own power, and it's highly charged. You can test it with meters and things. And then you have lower grades which don't come up on their own, like a well, or, the town collects water and then they put all sorts of chemicals in it. And that's lesser grade water. I don't know about hierarchies. It's just none of that's the best. And at that kind of water, you have to at least charge, and that may be enough. But sometimes you have to get rid of the poisons in it. And so there's various ways of doing that, filters and RO, and distill it. Then you put the minerals back, and then you flow it in vortexes over magnets or with stir it or something like that. You have to get the charge back. That's the most important part.
Okay, naturally from the spring where it comes up on its own, number one. Number two would be forced from the ground through like a well. Then it sounds like, which is going to be the most likely case for a lot of people, at least starting before they have a chance to find a spring and get into that whole...
You'd be amazed. Almost everywhere there's springs that the old people know about.
Okay, while they're doing the research and figuring that out, let's get into the details of somebody using distilled or RO. And you shared this, but I really want to make sure we get into what minerals, what device you'd use to vortex. Let's go right through the steps. Starting with at the top, would you pick distilled or RO if you were getting water in a city?
What I do is we have town water into our house. And so every week I go and collect from a spring that does what I just said. and then I stir it with an analemma wand, which is basically charged water, or I vortex it through something called an MEA water device, which creates a vortex and it creates electromagnetic field and charges them. They're both doing the similar thing, charging otherwise pure spring water. Now, with the water that comes into the house, we put it through a pretty extensive carbon filter to get rid of everything. It doesn't get rid of fluoride, but we don't have fluoride in our water. And then it goes through a spiral copper pipe. And that energizes the water. And then the water comes out in the bath or in the tub and or in the sink. And then I put some basically sea salt in it. And I typically use something called purple bamboo salt, which is sea salt that has been burned in bamboo shoots for 9 times. And that mineralizes the water. And then I put it through either this analemma water wand or MEA water vortexing thing. And now I appreciate that not everybody will want to do all that, but I'm retired and I don't have anything to do except garden and mess around with water, so that's what I do.
So those first 2 steps, where you're filtering with carbon and then putting it through the copper pipe, it sounded like, is that through the whole house?
Yes.
Okay.
And the garden.
Got it. And then the next step is the salt. Will you only use that if it's town water, or will you put that in your spring water too?
No, I don't put that in. Spring water, I don't do anything except stir it or vortex it. And that water then goes through, like the showers, we have these shower heads, which are 6 different crystal vortexing tubes that create a suction just like the heart. In fact, he modeled it after the heart. And so there's one of them is a ruby and an emerald and quartz and other things. And that creates like a rainfall effect. So all of our showers and all of the water we water the garden comes from the town, filtered, copper tube, out with a shower head that makes this spiral formation.
And what's the brand of that shower head?
It's called Aquadea. We sell it on our website. It's a German guy who looked at this whole thing and created this model of how and you can feel when the water comes out, it suctions you can feel the suction, so it pulls your hand against the shower head.
And is that something you have to change every 6 months and you get rid of the whole thing? Or
once, you never change it again.
Okay. And then the salt is added. What brand is that special purple bamboo salt?
I mean, I use one called Insan, and there's also one called Pryor, I think is the name of it. But I use Redmond salt and Celtic salt and Himalayan salt and Hawaiian potassium salt. I use different salts. I think, in fact, I have probably 8 or 10 different salts, and I think you should use different ones regularly just because they have a different mineral composition.
And as you share, it's obvious you're not fearing salt. How do you determine how much you're using? Is it just to taste?
Yeah, just taste.
And then what about how much water to drink on a daily basis? We have this societal norm of something around 8 glasses a day where we're bringing bottles with us and sipping on them throughout the day, making sure we get that 8 glasses. There's different people saying different things, but in that range, how do you look at amount of water we should be drinking?
The reality is, and if you look at normal biochemistry, 99% of it's total BS, but they do talk about like the Krebs cycle, right? Glucose and goes through all these different steps. And the end result is ATP, which they say is energy, which isn't, but they say that it is, and water and carbon dioxide. So in other words, we're told that we generate water from the metabolism of food, right? That's what we're told. And when you put something through a fatty acid metabolism, you generate a lot of water, which means we're always generating water in our body. And that's our water. That has our signature. It has our energetic blueprint. So I think that's the best water for us. So I don't drink much water. I drink a glass of water with lemon juice in the morning. And then typically I don't drink much water after that. Now it's really hot here and sweaty. And so I drink things like beet kvass, where I ferment beets and put some salt in it. We make water kefir, and so I drink that. And my wife makes ales based with our own herbs that she ferments. So I definitely drink that. But I don't drink plain water otherwise.
Okay, so on a typical day, 1 glass in the morning with lemon. What is happening when people are trying to get, say, 8 glasses a day, and they're bringing those Stanley bottles with them throughout the day and sipping on it constantly? Obviously, you're not doing that. There's a reason. Why is that?
So let's say you have a faulty pump in your basement, right? And then you want to circulate the water through your house, right? And the pump is getting old and you don't have that much money, so it's leaking a little bit. And so the pressure in your shower is a little weak. You with me?
Yep.
So what would happen if you added twice the amount of water to the system, especially at the pump?
It would overwhelm it.
And then what would happen?
It would break.
And leak, right?
Yep.
And it would make it even harder to pump the water, right?
Yeah, more work for it to do.
Yeah, it's too heavy. It's got all this water in it. So most people have faulty pumps, the pump being the structured water, because they never connect with the earth and the sun and love and et cetera. And so they think they're dehydrated. So they add more water to their pump, and that makes it harder to circulate. And then they say, oh, I feel even worse. I must need to drink even more. And the next thing you know, they have swelling in their ankles because the water is now impossible for their body to circulate. So it just falls down to the lowest place, and that's called edema. And they feel tired and sluggish and nothing works right. And then the health people tell them to drink more water and it gets worse. And they wonder what's the problem. So that's what happens to people who drink a lot of water.
Okay, so again, on a typical day, you're having 1 cup of water.
By the way, if you're thirsty, then you should drink water. That's how you know. And you should drink water with some salts in it.
Well, that's where I was going next. Your typical 1 glass of water a day with lemon. When do you take in electrolytes?
I eat salt with every food I eat. And if it's really hot, like it has been, maybe once or twice in the day, I'll put a half a teaspoon of like bamboo salt in a glass of water with some lemon in it and drink that.
Say you're out traveling, you don't have access to your regular spring water or the water you're filtering at home. What brands do you rely on in that case?
In that case, I use a Flaska water bottle, which, by the way, we also sell. But the reason is it's a bottle that has inscriptions on it, and it's based on the sacred geometry, and just the geometry and the form of the bottle structures the water on the inside. So I get whatever water I can in glass bottles. I try to never use water in plastic bottles because it dissolves that. And I put that in the Flaska bottle, and that will structure it for me. I have a very interesting story about the Flaska bottle, which I've read the research and you can see how it structures the water. But I had a friend who lives near me, and she bought Flaska. They're basically glass bottles, and she bought one for her and her son and her husband. And after a month or so, she came to me and said, "Tom, the water in my Flaska bottle has black gunk floating around in it." And I thought, not my husband or my son. And I thought, well, that's weird. It must be something in the water bottle, that's leaching off into the water. So I took the water bottle and tried it myself, and I gave her a new water bottle. And it didn't make the black gunk for me, and it did with the water bottle that I had been using that never made black gunk. And then we tried it with another one. Now, one of the principles of structured water is, and the reason Gerald Pollack calls it easy water, exclusion zone water, is that when you form a gel, it pushes out things that are not supposed to be in the water. So that's why it's exclusion zone. So about a month later, she ended up getting diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And my take on it was, there was something in her, she would use drink out of the water bottle straight. And so there was some of her that was getting in the water bottle, and that was causing the water in the water bottle to be structured and push out some black, yuck, toxic stuff that was unique to her, because those same water bottles and my water bottle didn't do it to me or her husband or her son. And that told me this water bottle is probably the best diagnostic tool you can imagine. Because if it's pushing out black gunk, there's something wrong.
Interesting. Have you heard that with any other people?
I have asked people, and nobody else has seen that. And I'm on the lookout for somebody who wants to try it.
And this lady that had cancer, was she okay in the end?
Let's just say no.
Sorry to hear.
Yeah, but it was a amazing story of, and of course, I don't know that that's what really happened. I'm speculating, but I ended up getting renewed a respect for the power of water and the power of putting water in its right form, in its right geometry, and its right energetic environment, what you can find from that. And for people who are interested in that, I would check out the work of Veda Austin, who's done a lot of work on messages from water and what water can tell us. And basically, our memory is in water and consciousness is in water, and water is sort of everything.
Given the importance of water and what you know, any other modalities that you found are helpful? Putting your water under moonlight, other sacred geometry, using trace minerals, other supplements, ways we can condition that water to make it more powerful?
Nothing I can say for sure. I've seen a lot of those in sunlight and blue bottles, and I think it's great for people to experiment. I think also having a relationship with the water, and I actually thank the water in my body every day for keeping me going and keeping me alive and keeping me healthy and clean. So I think the more we can do to create a relationship with our water inside us and outside us, the better. But I don't know anything that I can say, do this. I've seen the research on the water wand that we use called an analemma wand, and I've seen the research on meawater.com, the way they do it. And it's pretty profound stuff. The research that I pay attention to is you water plants with normal water or this water and see what happens. Or you feed animals, etc. Not biochemical pathways and stuff like that. I don't care about that stuff.
I know at least at one point you were a fan of the Aphora water. Are you still?
I mean, I think they're working on it. I think that it's not perfect, though.
Can you say
But we
what?
do have an Aphora water device, and I use that.
Okay. Can you say what they need to perfect there?
You know, anything besides water that comes out on its own is not perfect. So anytime you're cleaning the water, et cetera, you know, there's compromises.
And what about carbonated water? I know most times that's something that's done to that water afterwards in processing. How do you feel about that?
So I make carbonated water. It's called water kefir. And basically I put water kefir grains in water with lemons, sliced lemons, and it becomes carbonated. And so I like that. Whether it's good for me or not, I don't know. But I like it. And I would be loath to not drink that kind of my fizzy water kefir.
When it comes to water, we've talked about drinking water. We have water we're going to get through food. You mentioned the body making water. I just want to understand the physiology there, because we also can charge our water before we take it in. In the end, is all the structured water in our body, whether it be from drinking, from food, does that, and I assume it would have to, go through our system and be processed in a way to make that structured water? And if so, where does it happen?
It happens, that's called life. You're an energetic field, and your energy takes in whatever water you're drinking or whatever water you're making. It charges it and somehow distributes it to where it needs to go. And how that happens, I have no idea.
I didn't know if it was specifically the mitochondria in energy production making that water or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
What about diet? What do you recommend for somebody taking on a healthier lifestyle like we're talking about today? What's the base?
The base is, it's like people say, so Tom, I should read the ingredients before I eat something. And I always say no, because if it has ingredients, don't eat it. Like carrots don't have ingredients, right? It's a carrot. A banana doesn't have an ingredient. Meat doesn't really have an ingredient. It might say, roast beef or something. If it has ingredients, you should be suspicious of it. And then it's all about quality, which is the problem with modern science, is they have no conception of quality. So I'm pretty much done thinking food has stuff in it. In other words, I don't eat tomatoes because they have lycopene in it. I don't eat cod liver oil. I don't eat cod liver oil anyways, but if I did, I don't do it because it has vitamin A or vitamin D. I don't eat butter because it has linoleic acid. I don't even know if it has. I don't do any of that stuff. Not even convinced those things are real anymore. I eat butter because I know the cow, I know how it was produced, and I like the effect of eating butter. And I know that people who ate a lot of butter had really good health. I eat food from my garden. I'm a big gardener, and because I know how it was grown, and I know how it was picked, and I know how it was cooked, and that's what I eat. And I pick berries from our garden and make them into drinks, and that's how you should eat. Now, should you eat meat? I think that's part of a normal human diet. Should you eat eggs and dairy products? I think that's part of a normal human diet, but only raw milk, and particularly raw milk that's made into kefir or yogurt or butter. I don't drink like plain milk, but I make, goat milk kefir because I like goats and I like the taste and I like how I feel when I eat goat milk. And that's how I would suggest everybody do it. Not that goat milk has more linoleic acid than this. You don't even know if that's true. And every time you do that, you separate yourself from your own experience. And that's a problem. Whereas if you stick to what you can feel and what you can smell and what you can taste and how it feels, and asking yourself the question, who did that and how did they do? Then I think you'll come out with the right diet.
All right, so get rid of the labels. Quality matters.
Quality is everything.
But what about percentage of animals versus plants? Calories, macronutrients. Do you look at any of those?
Forget about calories, macronutrients. Forget about all that stuff. It's mostly make-believe. You eat, for dinner, I eat steak from Hugh and Hannah's cows. I know the cows. I knew them before they were. And we cook it in lard that we get from their pigs. And then I eat vegetables from our garden. What the percentage? I don't know.
And how do you feel about timing of eating? Eating within a certain window, intermittent fasting, and then snacking.
So we typically have breakfast around 8:30 to 9. That's partly because it's after so-called chores. So we feed the goats and I feed the cat who lives outside, and I prepare the cat who lives inside food, and then I water the garden and stuff like that. Sometimes do other garden chores and come in and eat around 8:30. And it's usually a pretty big breakfast, like eggs and vegetables and sometimes sourdough bread with butter. And then I'll eat a little bit throughout the day, but usually not very much. And then we eat dinner around 4 to 4:30. And that's usually the meat or fish, wild salmon sometimes, or mostly meat and vegetables and some fruit and things like that. And then I don't eat any more after that. After that, say 5, only water or water with lemon in it.
What about longer fasts, including water fasting, doing extended water fasts?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, and I think it's good. I haven't done that myself, probably because I like eating too much. And but I know there's a lot of people. We have a oncologist who works with our clinic a little. She's like a referral, and she only does water fasting for cancer patients. So there's a lot of benefit for that. We also tend to put people on eating once a day. So they'll eat like at 6 o'clock at night and only eating once a day. And I think there's a lot of good for that too, especially with like diabetics and a lot of people who are otherwise chronically ill. So there's a lot of you can get from changing the timing and changing the composition, what you're calling the macronutrients, how much fat, how much meat, how much vegetables, how much fruit, changing that up and see how you do.
Coming back to these variables that impact the water in our body and structure it, sunlight, grounding, connection with animals, other people. How do you look at getting those inputs on a regular basis? Or is it just organic for you, knowing that they matter?
We've structured our life around that. So we have goats and we have chickens and we have cats and, like it or not, I have to go out at 6 and feed the goats and give them fresh water and take Lucy her cat food. And, the other ones are yowling at me to eat. And, that happens no matter how I feel about anything. And then I have to go outside, whether it's 10 degrees out or 90 or whatever. And then we do it again in the evening and fresh water and give them new hay and it's, open the gates so they can go out and stuff. It's important enough to me. That's how I structured my life. I don't want to live in a concrete jungle anymore. It doesn't work for me. And I know not everybody has to do that, but I think everybody has to be as much out in some kind of nature as possible. Otherwise, you're going to suffer.
Obviously, nature is best when it comes to these things. But for you or other people, do you recommend hacking them and bringing them into the home through things like grounding mats, red light panels? There's spurty lights that can help with vitamin D.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, I never care about vitamin D. That whole thing is hugely misunderstood, and I'm not even convinced anymore there are vitamins or hormones in us, and that's a whole long subject. But I mean, we use red lights and candles when it's dark out, and I use a sauna space sauna in the winter to sweat. And I mean, I've got every device that ever been, because people send them to me, and I don't tend to use them very much. I have one little thing that keeps the boogeyman EMFs away from me, which I don't know if it does or not. And I have these cards that have this code in it that I use for healing, and that's kind of all I do. So I'm not a big fan of doing all those things. I suppose if I was living in a city and didn't get outside, I'm not sure which of those I would do, but red light sauna, space sauna, I think works well.
Are you taking any supplements at all?
I take Strophanthus for 20 years because everybody told me it would kill me, and I wanted to see if that was true, and I can tell you it isn't. And occasionally I take something called Shilajit, which is the concentrate of the goop from plants grown in high altitude. And I take that when I want to have something really yucky to taste. So that's what I take.
Pretty potent stuff. How do you take it?
We have little tablets and I just suck on them, which is really yucky. But I like yucky stuff. I've been eating yucky stuff for 50 years.
I'm with you. I get it.
Yeah.
Let's come back to EMFs. They've come up a couple times. You mentioned this one device. You're not sure if it really does anything. What is that? And then any other modalities or things you're doing to keep them at bay?
I mean, the problem with EMFs, so, the sun is a frequency emitter, and so is the moon, and so is the earth. And without getting too much into the weeds on that, we're meant to be exposed to a wide variety of low intensity electromagnetic frequencies. And what an EMF is by definition, high intensity single frequency or few frequencies, because that's how it works, right? You can't run your cell phone on the sun or the moon. You have to have certain frequencies, higher intensity that are picked up by the cell phone in ways that I don't really understand, but that's how I'm told it works. So that's not something humans are used to. And therefore, it changes your electromagnetic field, and that's everything. That's how we structure the water. We are electromagnetic fields. We are electrical generating devices. And if anybody disagrees with that, I would love to hear how come you can measure an EKG or an EEG or an EMG. You're measuring the electrical activity of your heart and brain and muscles. And so even though doctors will tell you you're not generating electricity, they use those tools to assess the health of the organs. So I'm suspicious of the negative effects of all man-made electromagnetic fields. So for instance, I don't have any mobile devices. I don't have a cell phone or a tablet. I use this one wired computer. It's wired through an Ethernet cable, and that's all I ever use. And we don't have Wi-Fi in our house. we just have these two Ethernet cables. And, we checked out the house with a biogeometry person and a building biologist to make sure it was in a safe zone as we could. And then we have multiple devices around the house. And again, most of them have been given to me. I don't even remember where they came from. I've done podcasts with many of them. They're like boxes or, like orgone generating things like this. And I have things like this, and I have things like Likovsky things all over the place. And I have this that I carry around in my pocket. And I have no idea what happens with any of these things really, except I seem to be okay. And, I understand the theory of transmuting the waves into something less harmful. That's what they say. And whether they do that or not, I don't really know. But some of them have some interesting research that suggests it's doing something helpful. I may be canceling them all out by having so many of them, and I don't really know what to tell somebody to do. I would check out the different devices and use whatever instincts and science you can bring to bear on it.
Okay, so no Wi-Fi in the house. That's impressive. Any neighbors that have Wi-Fi that you're picking up?
Probably yes, which is why we have the devices to mitigate that.
I know they have these Faraday cages. I don't have one yet, but how do you think about that over top of the bed?
Yeah, I wouldn't do that because I want to be part of the Earth's field. So I wouldn't sleep in a Faraday cage.
What about bringing grounding mats into the house? So when you're, say, in an interview like this, you're grounded.
If you put your feet on a grounding mat, you're encouraging those field to go through your body out into the grounding mat. So, but I do spend probably somewhere between half an hour to an hour a day barefoot in the grass, and mostly in the garden. I do most of my garden work barefoot, and when I'm not barefoot, it's with barefoot shoes, some of which are grounded, or I'll have leather moccasins, which are grounded. And I have a walking stick that's grounded. So it's got a copper thing and a coil. So I carry that around sometimes.
All right, as we're wrapping up, a couple more loose ends I want to tie up. One being ATP. You quickly mentioned this not being our energy currency. Let's talk about that.
So a guy named Gilbert Ling did his PhD thesis on sodium-potassium pump, which is one of the crowning jewels of modern science, right? The question was always, how do mammalian cells live in a sodium-rich environment, but they concentrate potassium inside and push the sodium outside, right? So that's when you lose that gradient creates essentially the voltage, the charge of living tissues. So this is as fundamental to modern science as it gets, that the reason this happens is because the sodium-potassium pump in the membrane pumps the sodium out and the potassium in. And his whole PhD thesis proved that there's no such thing as a sodium-potassium pump. It's all basically just nonsense. And he proved that by stripping the membrane off the cells, and the sodium-potassium distribution was the same. And he also proved that ATP has nothing to do with energy. I don't even know if it's actually there. We're not a biochemistry set, but the medicine. It all comes back, as I like to say. It's a contest between atom and atom. So one atom is ADAM that were made by God which is a creative consciousness energetic field. And the other atom is atom, and we're made by bouncing billiard balls, which randomly collide with each other. And then you get a frog, and the bouncing balls keep bouncing, and then you get a gorilla, and then they keep bouncing, and then you get Aunt Hilda. And that's nonsense. We're not made of molecules or atoms. That's basically just a story. It's just theory. And if you even know how they came up with the atomic theory, it's a load of hooey. Which, by the way, also means there can't be atomic bombs because there's nothing to split. So that's just sort of fear stuff. That's a whole nother subject too. But anyways, so ATP is a chemical which may or may not be in us, and he proved it has nothing to do with energy. There's no more energy in a triphosphate bond than any other simple molecule. It's got nothing to do with it. He wondered whether it's somehow like when you make Jell-O, you take gelatin proteins, you mix it with water, right? Nothing happens. So you heat it, and that unfolds the proteins, and then they attach to the water, and then they make Jell-O. He wondered whether ATP attaches to the proteins that are the skeleton in our tissues, and that allows them to interact with water, and that allows it to gel and create a charge. So it looks like it's got to do with energy, but it doesn't have anything to do with energy, except in creating the environment for the cells to become charged, or the tissues.
Okay, so still a little bit of mystery there of how that work is being done at the end.
The whole thing is a mystery. How you go from an energetic field and consciousness into like stuff. Like that's a pretty big nut to crack. And then the other guys tell us, by the way, the stuff is made of atoms, and atoms are this little nucleus. And then all the way over in New York City, that's where the electrons are, right? And then in between, there's nothing. And so your finger is made of atoms made of nothing, and the table is made of atoms made of nothing, right? That's what they say. So how come I can't stick my finger through the table? I don't buy it. It's just a story that makes you think this is so complicated, I can't possibly understand it, and it must be all random, and nobody's in charge here, and I don't have any agency. I don't have anything to do with this. It's just bouncing billiard balls, and then you get Lou Gehrig's disease. That's it. Don't worry about it.
Well, like you said at the beginning, you don't necessarily have the answers, but there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that you can't prove that the current theory is incorrect, which is the first step in my mind. And then what we're talking about here, how it actually works, once we've disproven something, that can be the next step for science or people to go and figure out.
I know I didn't kill that guy. I don't know who did it. But I know it wasn't me. I know there's no atoms. I know ATP hasn't done anything to do with energy. I know there's no sodium potassium pump. I know the heart isn't a pump. I know blocked arteries don't cause heart attacks. I know viruses don't exist or never been shown to exist. I know bacteria don't cause illness. Parasites mostly don't exist, and the ones that do have never been shown to cause illness. I know all those things for sure. It doesn't mean that I know what causes somebody to be sick. I don't know who killed that guy. I know it wasn't me. That's called thinking.
And you're saying exactly what I'm saying.
I don't know how many
agree.
doctors I've asked. I don't know how many doctors I've said, there's no evidence that there's a chickenpox virus, right? Instead of saying, here's the evidence for a chickenpox virus, here's the definition of the illness, here's how we found the virus. They say, so what causes chickenpox? Who killed them? And until you tell me who killed them, you're guilty. That is scientific illiteracy, which is the problem today. That's the problem with the doctors and the scientists in particular. They're scientifically illiterate. They don't know how to stick with, here is the evidence, because if they told you the evidence of how they know there's a virus that caused chickenpox, you would say, are you kidding me? You got to be kidding, because but they don't know it because they don't care, or whatever reason. I don't know why they don't know it. I didn't know it either. So I was just as guilty as anybody else. But I did have a sense. I knew enough to know, look into what isn't true first.
Well, viruses have come up a couple times, and them not being real. This is the last open loop I want to close with you before we part ways. How do we know this?
Well, it's the other side. How do they prove viruses exist? So let's do a quick walkthrough. Let's talk the polio virus, right? So they get somebody who has a disease, they're paralyzed, right? And then they die. So they take some of their spine out. They don't see a virus. They don't have any sensory impression of a virus, right? All they know is the child died and their spine is diseased. So they take this spine, grind it up in a blender, put it in some water, inject that into the brain of 2 monkeys. 1 monkey dies, 1 got paralyzed, and they said, there, we isolated the virus. I read that and I thought, you have got to be kidding. Because first of all, you don't know that there's a virus in there. And second of all, maybe monkeys don't like having dead spinal goop injected in their brain. And they didn't bother to inject like healthy spinal goop or even just saline into there, see if that, just injecting stuff into monkeys' brains. And then they did that for 50 years. And thousands, 100,000 monkeys, that was how they proved the existence of the polio virus. And then in 1953, somebody said, I'm going to inject normal spine into these monkeys' brains, see what happens. You know what happened? Monkey died, got paralyzed. He said, we've disproved how we knew there was a polio virus. But don't worry, we have a new way of proving it. Let's do it with measles virus. And I'm going to maybe get something here. Yeah. So 1954 came the gold standard of proving there's a virus. Paper by John Enders. Most people haven't read it, but I've read it 50 times. So he takes the mucus from a child they say has measles. They don't look for a virus. They can't find a virus. They've never seen a virus in any biological fluid of any sick person. Never. And they say it. You can't see it. So they take somebody who has measles, they say, they take the mucus, they centrifuge it, get some of the debris out, and then they have a vial of like centrifuge snot from somebody with measles. Then they put that on a culture of monkey kidney cells, and they add kidney poison antibiotics, and then they take away the food of the kidney cells, and then they add horse serum and fetal bovine serum and some other serums. And then they add some chemicals like trypsin. 3 days later, the kidney cells die. And they said, see, that's called the isolation of the measles virus. The proof that there's a measles virus. And I read that, I thought, and to this day, that is how all viruses have been isolated, proven to exist. No exceptions. Now, here's the interesting thing. In this same paper that he got a Nobel Prize for, he says the following. A second agent was obtained from uninoculated culture of monkey kidney cells. The cytopathic changes it induced in the unstained preparation could not be distinguished from the viruses isolated from measles. In other words, he actually took everything the same, except he didn't put anything from anybody with measles. And so he didn't inoculate the culture, put the antibiotics, took away the nutrients, added the serums and the chemicals, and it broke down the same. Now, I don't know about you, but that tells me it had nothing to do with anything from the measles person. Right?
Yeah.
It's finished.
That's what you think,
should have said, this is bullshit. We're not doing this anymore. And that has been repeated a dozen times, and we repeated it ourselves, and you always get the exact same thing. That proves that is the way they prove the existence of viruses to this day. It's called the viral culture. It's the gold standard of virology. If you get rid of the viral culture, there is no virology left.
Why can't they just let it go?
It's good business. What do they make billions and terrorize the people, which is the function of government, by selling them vaccines for chickenpox and measles and mumps. And then they tell you, by the way, oh, so the reason we give you this vaccine is so you make antibodies, right? COVID shot. And Jesse, we know antibodies protect you for life from the disease, right? You heard that. You get measles, you get antibodies, you never get measles again. You get chickenpox, you get antibodies, you never get chickenpox again. You get the flu, you get antibodies. Well, then you get the flu again, but that's because the flu is smart and it evaded the antibodies. Then you get HIV and you get antibodies. And Jesse, that's because antibodies mean the virus is going to kill you. And I remember when I first heard that in 1984 from Gallo, he got on the TV and said, we've discovered the cause of AIDS, it's HIV, and we know because people have antibodies. And I turned to my friend and said, wait a minute. I just spent 4 years learning that antibodies mean I'm protected from the disease. And this joker just got on the TV and said, antibodies mean I'm going to die from the virus. Like, who changed the rules with no explanation? You gotta be friggin' kidding me. And to this day, they say, oh, antibodies may mean you're immune. It may mean you're not immune. We don't know. Never mind. That's why we're vaccinating you. But if you have antibodies, we still need to vaccinate you because we can't trust the antibodies. And thanks very much for coming. $1 trillion and all this research. And we get to close down the world and kill all the chickens and come after your cats and dogs. All because of an imaginary virus. It's great. It's a great gig if you can get it.
Well, Tom, we're going to end it there for today. I appreciate you, this conversation, your truth-seeking nature, your inquisitive nature. The work you're doing is so important. Thanks again.
All right, Jesse. Take care.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
Life is just all about harvesting energy from the environment and using it to create order. And if you don't have enough energy in the system to maintain the order, you get disease. Things start to break down. And so the first place that the body seems to sacrifice is the lining of the